I'm Samantha Foster, and this is Venus Mastermind, a space for honest reflection, pattern breaking, and sovereign thinking. I'm not here to perform or to teach in a formal way. This is a shared reflection, a place to think out loud, to name what's been living in me, and to speak honestly about what I'm seeing and integrating. There's no agenda here beyond truth and presence. If something here resonates, take what's yours and leave the rest. Welcome back to our series. Last week we started a conversation about morals. We looked at morals as judgment systems, those inherited ideas of right and wrong that shape how we see ourselves, others, and how we interpret meaning, belonging, and worth. We explored how most of us didn't consciously choose our morals, and how they often operate beneath our awareness, fused with identity, shame, righteousness, and survival. This conversation is important because values don't exist in a vacuum. They don't form independently of morals. Instead, they emerge within the moral frameworks we inherit. Before we can understand what we truly value, we need to understand how we learn to judge. Morals are the lens through which meanings was first assigned. They taught us what was praised and what was punished, what was rewarded and what was shamed, and what made someone good, acceptable, or worthy. Those judgments quietly shaped what we learned to prioritize. So when people try to define their values without examining their morals first, something subtle but important happens. They mistake inherited judgment for personal priority. They confuse what they were taught to admire with what they actually protect. They adopt values they believe they should have, rather than noticing the ones their behaviors already reveals. That's why this series is structured the way it is. Morals come first because they explain how we judge. Values come next because they explain what we actually prioritize. Until judgment is made visible, values can't be seen clearly. Otherwise, people try to change goals, set boundaries, or get disciplined while still operating inside unexamined moral framework that quietly contradicts what they're trying to build. So this episode isn't a reset, it's a continuation. We're moving from judgment into choice, from inherited meaning into lived priority, from who we learned we had to be, what we actually protect when something has to give. This is the internal ecosystem, and today we're talking about values.
Values, what you actually prioritize, not what you say matters.
Not the version most people are familiar with, not the list you write down when someone asks what matters to you, and not the aspirational version of who you want to be. I want to talk about values as they actually function in real life. Values are foundational, and yet they're rarely examined honestly. Most people think they know their values, but what they actually know is what they admire, what they were taught to admire, or what they believe they should care about. Values aren't usually questioned because they don't announce themselves as a problem. Instead, they show up as something quieter and more confusing. We often find ourselves feeling off, unmotivated, and conflicted with a restlessness that we can't quite put our finger on. We set goals with the best intentions, but somehow we just can't seem to follow through. Boundaries? They feel like they're either too rigid or too flimsy, never quite right. And then there's the self-criticism, that nagging voice telling us we're not disciplined enough, not clear enough. We judge ourselves harshly, and sometimes we extend that judgment to others, holding everyone to an internal standard that never quite makes sense. And the assumption is almost always the same: something must be wrong with me. But very often, nothing is wrong. What's happening is a misalignment between stated goals and actual values. And because values aren't clearly understood, the friction gets interpreted as failure instead of information. This is where a lot of unnecessary self-judgment comes from. People think they're resisting change when they're actually protecting something that matters more to them than the goal they're chasing. They think they lack willpower when their nervous system is simply refusing to sacrifice a value they never named. They think they're inconsistent when their behavior is actually very consistent, just not the story they're telling themselves. This is why values matter, not as ideals, not as virtues, but as internal priorities. Because whether you've named them or not, your values are already governing your life. They're shaping how you spend your time, where your energy goes, what you tolerate, what you protect, and what you repeatedly choose, especially when trade-offs exist. And here's the anchor I want to hold for this entire episode. Most people aren't living against their goals. They're living according to their actual values without knowing it. This conversation isn't about changing what you value. It's not about upgrading yourself or becoming better. And it's not about telling anyone what should matter. It's about bringing clarity to yourself. Stop mislabeling alignment as failure and begin making decisions that actually fit the life you're living now. That's where we're starting.
What values actually are.
So let's get clear on what values actually are. Not the inspirational version, but the functional one. Values are your internal priorities. They describe what you actually choose when trade-offs exist, when something has to give and you can't have everything. This is why values can't be understood through intention alone. They reveal themselves through behavior and through feelings. Values show up in very concrete places. How you allocate your time, where your energy actually goes, and what you spend money on without much deliberation. What consistently holds your attention even when you're tired. What repeats under pressure. And perhaps most tellingly, what makes you feel aligned, relaxed, and energized when you're living inside it. That's where values live, in patterns and emotions, not in declarations. And this is also why values are so often misunderstood. Morals teach us what is good. Culture teaches us what is admirable. Identity teaches us what we want to be seen as. But values are revealed by something different, by what you protect when those stories collide with reality. Here's the core truth I want you to hold as we move through this. Your values are not what you admire. They are what you protect when something has to give. If two things matter, values determine which one survives the trade-off. And that doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you lack discipline. And it doesn't mean you're failing. It means your behavior and your emotions are already telling the truth, even if your self-story hasn't caught up yet. This is why values work differently than morals. Morals judge meaning, values organize priority. And when you're living inside your actual values, not the borrowed ones, not the inherited ones, but the real ones, something in the body relaxes. Things feel coherent. Decisions feel cleaner. Energy stops leaking into the gap between who you're performing and who you actually are. And once that distinction becomes clear, a lot of self-criticism begins to dissolve. Not because anything has changed, but because things finally make sense.
What values are not. Critical clarification.
Before we go any further, let's talk about what values are not. This distinction matters more than it might sound. Values are not morals, ethics, virtues, goals, or personality traits. Nor are they rules for other people, and definitely not proof that you're a good person. This matters more than it sounds. Values don't exist to judge you, to correct your behavior, or to make you better, purer, or more evolved. That's the job people usually assign them, and it's the wrong job. Morals judge. Ethics regulate responsibility when others are affected. Virtues describe character ideals. Goals describe outcomes. And personality traits describe tendencies. Values do none of that. Values don't enforce behavior, but they orient our decisions. They don't say, you should do this. They say, when something has to give, this is what I protect. That's it. A value doesn't punish you when you don't follow it, shame you, or demand consistency. It simply shows you where your choices already go. This is why people get so confused. Someone will say, "I value honesty," while repeatedly choosing safety over truth. Or, "I value family," while consistently sacrificing connection for work. Or, "I value freedom," while structuring their life around approval. And instead of reading that as information, they turn it into self-judgment. But that's not a value problem. That's a category error. Values don't tell us who we should be. They show us what we're already prioritizing, especially when there's pressure, conflict, or cost. They don't sit on top of our life like rules, but rather sit underneath it, quietly organizing trade-offs. Once you understand that, something important happens. You stop using values as a weapon against yourself. You stop trying to live up to them, and you start using them the way they're actually meant to be used, as orientation, not enforcement. That distinction is what lets us move forward without collapsing back into moral judgment. And from here, we can start looking at how people miss their values entirely, not because they're dishonest, but because they're borrowing priorities that were never theirs to begin with. Let me share a personal example of what I mean by values as internal priorities. For many years, if you asked me what I valued, I would have told you education, career, responsibility, and achievement. And on the surface, my life seemed to confirm that. My time went to work, my energy went to producing, my attention went to advancement, my money followed those same priorities. But here's the key point. That alignment wasn't proof of my values. It was proof of my trade-offs. When something had to give and something was always giving, it was my children, my health, and my nervous system that paid the cost. Presence was sacrificed and rest was postponed. My body absorbed the pressure, and I told myself that this was just what adulthood required. From the outside, it looked like discipline. Internally, it felt like constant strain. What I didn't understand at the time was this. I wasn't living against my values. I was protecting a set of priorities that were never actually mine. Because when trade-offs existed, real ones, not theoretical ones, what I protected was an achievement. It was approval. It was safety. It was not disappointing others. My career wasn't a value. It was a survival strategy, and it suffered. I was never able to get it off the ground and running full speed. Productivity wasn't priority. It was compliance with what had been framed as responsible. And the misery wasn't a failure of motivation or discipline. It was the cost of repeatedly overriding what I actually valued: relational presence, attunement, and embodied safety, in favor of what I had learned to admire. And my body paid the price through shingles, autoimmune disease, grief, sadness, and depression, finally hitting my stroke that was stress-related in my early 50s. Nothing about my behavior was inconsistent. It was patterned, it was repeatable, and it showed up under pressure. But I was miserable, and so were my kids. When we live inconsistent with our true values, it can show up as misery, depression, anger, frustration, and feeling defeated. That's how values work. They don't announce themselves through intention. They reveal themselves through sacrifice, behaviors, and feelings. And once I could see that something important shifted, the question stopped being, "What's wrong with me?" and became, "What am I actually protecting and why?" That's the difference between judging yourself and understanding your values.
How people miss or borrow their values.
This brings us to an important point: how we miss or borrow our values. We often miss our values because we don't truly understand what they are. We might assume values are beliefs, ideals, or virtues, so we never look at our behaviors for evidence. And we rarely question the emotional cost of the life we're forcing ourselves to live. Over time, that misalignment doesn't just create confusion. It creates exhaustion, resentment, and often depression, not because something is wrong with them, but because they're trying to sustain priorities that don't actually belong to them. One of the most common ways this happens is through family and cultural inheritance. You grow up inside an environment where certain priorities are rewarded and others are punished. Work is praised, rest is shamed, achievement is celebrated, presence is treated as secondary, self-sacrifice is framed as virtue, desire is framed as selfishness. Those priorities don't arrive labeled as values. They arrive as expectations about who you're supposed to be in order to belong. Another way people miss their values is by confusing identity stories with priorities. Someone believes I'm a disciplined person, or I'm ambitious, or maybe I'm someone who cares deeply. But identity statements are not values. They're narratives about how we want to see ourselves or be seen. Values don't live in identity, they live in choice. A third pattern is mistaking aspirations for a priority. People often list values they admire, respect, or hope to embody, and then judge themselves for not living up to them. But admiration is not valuation. Wanting something to matter does not mean it actually does, at least not enough to govern trade-offs. When something consistently loses to something else, that's not failure, that's information. Another common way values get borrowed is through belonging and approval. People adopt values because they want to stay inside a group, a family system, a profession, a community, or a social identity. They learn what earns approval, they learn what risks exclusion, and over time, they start organizing their life around those priorities, even when those priorities cost them energy, health, connection, or self-trust. Eventually, this creates a quiet split. On the surface, someone is doing everything right. Underneath, they feel resistance, exhausted, or numb without knowing why. And this is where the most damaging pattern shows up. People begin judging themselves using values they do not actually hold. They shame themselves for not wanting what they were taught to want. They criticize themselves for not sustaining goals they were never aligned. They call themselves lazy, undisciplined, unmotivated, or broken. But very often they're not failing at all. They're living according to their actual values and punishing themselves for it. This is the important note I want to be very clear about. People often shame themselves for failing goals that never align with their values to begin with. Nothing has gone wrong. The system is working. It's just been misread. And that misread has a very specific shape. And we can see it most clearly in one place: the gap between values and goals.
Values versus goals, structural difference.
A lot of unnecessary self-judgment happens when we mix up values and goals. These two things operate on completely different levels. Goals are outcomes, things you want to achieve, reach, or complete. Values are priorities. They govern what you consistently choose when trade-offs exist. Think of it this way. A goal says, I want this. A value answers, what survives when I can't have everything? When goals and values aren't aligned, something always gets in the way. Not random failure, not mysterious sabotage, not a lack of discipline. You choose something that matters more to you, and that choice reveals the value. Here's an example. There was a man who had a goal of becoming a triathlete. He loved working out, biking, swimming, running, but he was constantly frustrated because he never fully committed to the triathlon identity. He felt like he was falling short. When he looked closer, he realized something important. He didn't value being a triathlete. He valued staying active. Those are not the same thing. Once he shifted the goal from being a triathlete to stay active and enjoy movement, everything stabilized. The workouts became sustainable. The pressure disappeared. The frustration dissolved. Nothing was wrong with him. The original goal demanded a sacrifice his values weren't willing to make. Same with cooking. I value cooking healthy meals at home. I enjoy it. It fits my life. It's sustainable. But I don't value being a chef. If I set a goal to become a chef, I would eventually walk away from it. Not because I lack discipline, but because that goal asks for a level of sacrifice I don't value. That's how structural misalignment works. Goals fail when they conflict with values already in place. Wanting something is not the same as valuing it. Desire is easy. Sustained sacrifice is the real measure. You can desire a certain body, want prestige, or admire wealth. But if you don't value the sacrifice those outcomes require, your behavior will eventually tell the truth. Here's where this gets personal. For years, I lived inside goals that were not aligned with my values. Career advancement, external achievement, and productivity at all costs. Those goals were praised, admired, and rewarded, but they were not my values. My values were time with my children, health, safety, and presence. No matter how hard I tried to sustain those career goals, something kept breaking. My health declined, my mental state deteriorated. Eventually, the job would collapse or I would leave. It looked like sabotage. It was never sabotage. It was a higher ranked value winning the trade-off. I always chose my children in the end, even when it cost me. That's what values do. Values determine what you give time to when time is limited, what you protect when energy is low, what you keep choosing when motivation disappears, and what survives when pressure is applied. Goals don't do that. Goals sit downstream from values. That's why two people can want the same thing and have completely different outcomes. Not because one is stronger, but because the goal aligns with one person's values and conflicts with another's. And here's the key point that dissolves shame. If a goal repeatedly collapses, it's not evidence of failure. It is evidence of a higher ranked value winning the trade-off. That value might be unnamed, might contradict the story you tell about yourself, or might not be admired. But it is real because behavior is real. And when a goal does align with your values, it feels different. It doesn't require constant forcing or relying on willpower alone. It feels coherent, even under pressure when you're tired and when life hits hard. That's why I can build Venus Mastermind through illness, stress, and major life shifts, because it aligns with my values: family, autonomy, meaning, and sovereignty. It doesn't ask me to portray something more important. Values determine what you will sacrifice for. Goals do not. Goals describe what you want. Values determine what you are willing to give up to get it. Once that distinction is clear, self-criticism starts to lose its grip and clarity replaces pressure.
Values revealed through behavior, not intention.
And once that's clear, it's worth asking, where do your values actually show up? Because it's rarely where people first look. Values don't live in what you say. They live in what you repeat. People resist this part because intention feels noble, but behavior is exposing. You can declare that health matters. You can say family is everything. You can insist that integrity is your top priority. But values aren't measured by statements. They're measured by patterns. Repetition matters more than declarations. If something consistently gets your time, your energy, your money, and your attention, that's a value in action. Not because you announced it, but because you protected it. Pressure makes this especially clear. Pressure reveals ranking. When you're tired, when time is limited, when resources are scarce, when stress is high, what survives? That's your value hierarchy. Not what you post, not what you aspire to, and not what you admire. What you keep choosing when something has to give. So much unnecessary shame builds up around discipline because of this. People say things like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Why can't I just stick with it? I must be lazy. I must lack willpower. But often nothing is wrong. What's happening is simpler. The goal they're trying to force requires sacrificing something they value more, and the nervous system refuses. That refusal isn't moral failure, it's clarity without language. That's where hustle guilt starts to unravel. If you value rest, but you're chasing a productivity identity, you're constantly feeling behind. If you value stability, but you're chasing risk for status, you'll feel anxious. If you value connection, but you're chasing achievement for approval, you'll feel empty, and you'll assume that emptiness means you're defective. It doesn't. It means you're misaligned. Discovering your real values isn't a confession. It's not an indictment, and it's not proof that you're less ambitious or less disciplined. It's data, and data is neutral. There's no moral failure in realizing that what you admire isn't what you prioritize. There's no shame in noticing what you thought you wanted isn't what you're willing to sacrifice for. The only real cost is continuing to lie to yourself about it. Because when you keep forcing goals that conflict with your actual value hierarchy, you create chronic internal tension. You fight your own nervous system. You interpret resistance as weakness. And you try to override reality with willpower. And that is exhausting. Once you stop moralizing your patterns and start observing them, something will shift. You don't ask, what's wrong with me? You ask, what am I protecting? And that question is far more honest. Values aren't discovered through inspiration. They're discovered through repetition. And once you see the pattern clearly, self-criticism starts to lose its authority. Not because you lowered the bar, but because you finally understand the system you've been living inside.
Internal misuse of values, nervous system impact.
That shift from self-criticism to self-clarity doesn't happen automatically. First, it helps to understand where the self-criticism is actually coming from. When we misuse our values internally, they stop being helpful information and start becoming a verdict on our worth. Instead of guiding us to understand what truly matters, they become fuel for self-criticism. That's when the internal voice shows up, saying things like, I should value this more. Why don't I care about this? What's wrong with me? Other people can do this, why can't I? That voice often feels personal, but it usually isn't original. For many of us, that tone was programmed early on. As children, we didn't choose our values. We absorbed what was praised and what was corrected. We quickly learned what earned approval and what risked distance. And because belonging equals safety in childhood, our nervous system learned something very simple. If I value what they value, I stay connected. If I don't, I risk love. So when a parent said directly or indirectly things like, good kids work hard, don't be lazy, selfless is better than selfish, you should care about this, the child didn't hear a philosophical suggestion. The child heard a survival rule. Over time, that external pressure becomes internalized. And now, as adults, we experience it as self-criticism. I should value career more. I should value discipline more. I should want this. But what's often happening isn't a moral failure or lack of ambition. It's a collision between what we were taught to value and what we actually live by now. When we misuse values this way, our nervous system tightens. Contraction replaces clarity. Fatigue replaces motivation. Resentment builds, often toward ourselves. Our sense of agency begins to erode. We feel like we're constantly negotiating with ourselves. And this doesn't only happen in overtly abusive homes. It happens in achievement-focused families, religious families, high-performing environments, and even loving households where approval was subtly conditional on alignment. This pattern is incredibly common. The adult work isn't about rebellion. It's about differentiation. It's about separating what I internalize to stay safe from what I actually prioritize now. That shift changes the whole inner conversation. Instead of saying, I should value this more, it becomes interesting. That ranks lower for me right now. That sentence alone takes the weight off, because now values are functioning as orientation, not punishment. And when values return to being information rather than enforcement, self-judgment begins to soften. Clarity replaces pressure, and choice becomes possible again.
External misuse of values, projection, and control.
And it will. But there's another dimension of this worth sitting with, because misuse doesn't only come from within. When we misuse values internally, they turn into self-punishment. But when we misuse them externally, they become leverage. And this isn't rare, it's everyday life. You hear it from partners, siblings, parents, friends, bosses, and even corporate culture. It sounds like if you cared, you would. If family was really important to you, you wouldn't. People who value hard work don't complain. If this mattered, you'd make time. Well, a real leader would, and a good employee would. You hear this in marriages, sibling rivalry, parenting, corporate performance reviews, and team culture meetings. Most of the time, no one says, I'm projecting my value hierarchy onto you. They frame it as principle, maturity, commitment, integrity, or loyalty. But here's what's actually happening. A personal priority is being reframed as a universal obligation. The speaker assumes their value ranking should govern the relationship. And once that happens, the pressure lands in the body. The subtext is no longer, I value this. It becomes, if you don't value this the way I do, something is wrong with you. That's how values quietly become moral judgment. And it doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it's subtle. A disappointed tone, withdrawal of warmth, sarcasm, a comparison to someone else, or a performance review note that says, not fully aligned with team culture. The message is the same. Your ranking should match mine. In intimate relationships, this often sounds like, if you loved me, you'd prioritize this. In families, it's, after everything we've done for you. In corporate environments, it's, we're looking for people who are truly committed. But committed to what? Aligned to whose values? That's where the relational pressure disguises itself as shared principle, and the body feels it immediately. Because belonging is being negotiated, the nervous system hears, conform or risk disconnection. Here's what actually protects your sovereignty. Values do not obligate others. Your values govern your trade-offs. They do not automatically govern someone else's. Shared values require consent, not assumption. Two people can absolutely decide. We both prioritize family over status. We both prioritize ambition over comfort. We both prioritize stability over novelty. But that alignment must be chosen. It cannot be coerced through shame. That's where so much relational resentment is born. One person feels unsupported, the other feels controlled, and neither realizes the real issue is an unspoken value hierarchy, not character, not loyalty, not love, or ranking. External misuse of values turns difference into deficiency. Used correctly, values create clarity. This matters deeply to me. Does it matter to you at that level? That question creates negotiation. The other creates pressure. And pressure always erodes trust over time. That's the line.
What values feel like when used correctly?
So what's on the other side of that line? When your values are clear and honored, something in your body settles. It's not because life suddenly becomes easy or trade-offs disappear, but because the internal fight quiets down. Decisions become simpler. You don't stand in front of two options and spiral. Instead, you ask, which one protects what matters most? The answer may still be hard, but it's clean. Trade-offs stop feeling like punishment. If you value time with your children more than career advancement, turning down overtime isn't self-sabotage. It's alignment. If you value autonomy more than status, walking away from a prestigious role isn't failure, it's coherence. The loss still exists, but it doesn't feel like betrayal. That's the difference. Boundaries begin to feel natural instead of dramatic. You don't need long explanations, moral justifications, or to convince someone else that your choice is right. You simply know what you protect. And when something conflicts with that, you adjust. There's less over-explaining, less defensive energy, and less need to win agreement. You're not trying to prove your value system is superior. You're just living inside it consciously. Self-trust increases not because you're certain about everything, but because you've seen the pattern. You've watched yourself under pressure, and you know what you choose when something has to give. And instead of fighting that data, you work with it. Resentment decreases. Resentment is often a sign that you've been sacrificing a higher ranked value for a lower ranked one, repeatedly. When your choices align with what actually matters to you, the internal tension drops. You're no longer negotiating against yourself. That's what coherence feels like. Not control, not superiority, and not rigidity. It's coherence. Your goals match your priorities. Your boundaries reflect your ranking, and your energy follows what you've decided matters. Using values correctly doesn't make you inflexible. It makes you honest. You can say, this matters to me, or this matters less, or I'm not willing to trade that, without turning it into a moral statement about anyone else. Using values correctly doesn't make you inflexible, it makes you honest. And you can say, this matters to me, this matters less. I'm not willing to trade that, without turning it into a moral statement about anyone else. Values used correctly organize your life. They don't control other people, and they don't require enforcement. They don't need performance either. They don't rely on shame, but they create internal agreement. And when internal agreement exists, pressure drops. That's the feeling, not intensity, not hype or virtue, just pure alignment. Clarity doesn't just come from discovering what you value, it comes from weeding out what isn't yours. Most people don't struggle with having no values. They struggle with having too many voices layered on top of them. Family voices, culture expectations, religious framing, corporate performance narratives, social media comparison, and old authority figures still living in the nervous system. Those voices don't usually announce themselves as not yours. They sound like you. They sound like you should care about this. This is what success looks like. A good person would prioritize that. And if you were serious, you would. When those voices remain unexamined, you don't live your values. You live in negotiation between your nervous system and everyone else's expectations. And that never feels coherent. It feels heavy, conflicted, like you're constantly behind, like you're performing a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit. So investigating your values isn't about asking what matters to me. It's also asking, where did it come from? Who benefits if I keep valuing this? Did I choose this or did I absorb it? Alignment requires subtraction. As long as you keep adopting other people's opinions, judgments, and priorities as your own, you will not experience internal agreement. You'll experience compliance, and compliance can look disciplined from the outside while feeling deadening on the inside. Living in alignment means removing inherited pressure, releasing borrowed ambition, separating admiration from priority, and letting other people value what they value without absorbing it. Only then can you actually feel what coherence is, because values aren't discovered through force. They're uncovered when the noise quiets down. And once that happens, decisions don't require constant justification. They just make sense. That's the difference between living someone else's hierarchy and living your own.
Who judges values and who does not?
And once you're living from that place, there's one more thing worth understanding. Who actually gets to judge your values? Because the answer might surprise you. Values are uniquely confronting. They cannot be judged by opinion. They are judged by behavior. Not once, not when you're inspired, and not when you're being watched, but over time. Values are revealed by patterns, by what survives trade-offs, by what you choose when you're tired, by what you protect when something has to give, by what keeps repeating under pressure. That's it. Your lived reality is the only scoreboard. And most people resist this part because culture will try to judge your values. Family will try to judge your values. Society will try to rank them. Morality will try to sanctify some and condemn others. Success culture will say certain values are superior. Discipline culture will say certain values are weak. But none of those systems actually determine your values. They only react to them. You can be admired and still be misaligned. You can be criticized and still be aligned. You can look successful and feel hollow. You can look ordinary and feel coherent. There's no external enforcement of values, no universe handing out medals, no culture assigning moral grades, no authority auditing what truly matters to you. The only thing that reveals your values is what you repeatedly choose, and that can feel confronting because it removes the fantasy that we are what we say we are. It comes back to something simpler, not what do I believe about myself, but what do I consistently protect? And once that becomes clear, there's no need for shame. There's just information, because values are not moral currency. They are structural reality. They don't care about approval. They care about priority, and priority always tells the truth. Culture promotes value hierarchies. Families reward certain values and punish others. Corporations incentivize specific behaviors. Governments promote narratives that stabilize participation. Media amplifies what drives engagement. That doesn't automatically make those systems malicious, but it does mean they are intentional. They are designed to produce outcomes. And if you are not intentional about your own values, you will absorb the ones that are constantly reinforced around you. Not because you're weak, because repetition works. So part of values work isn't just identifying what you prioritize. It's asking which of these priorities are actually mine, which are rewarded, which are pressured, which are modeled, and which were marketed. Because alignment requires two movements. First, clarity about what you actually value. Second, the willingness to say no to what doesn't align. And that second part is where most people hesitate. Not because they don't know, but because saying no can threaten belonging, approval, or status. Living in alignment with your values will require friction. It will require trade-offs. It will definitely require disappointing someone else. But the alternative is quieter and more corrosive. living according to value structures that were never consciously chosen. Values are not discovered once. They are refined through discernment. And the more intentional you become, the less reactive you are to external pressure. You stop chasing what is loud. You start protecting what is true.
Values versus culture and conditioning.
And to protect what's true, you first have to understand what's been shaping it, often without your awareness. Values don't develop in isolation. They grow inside culture, and culture promotes value hierarchies. Every society quietly ranks what matters most: productivity over rest, independence over interdependence, achievement over presence, wealth over time, strength over sensitivity. These hierarchies aren't neutral. They're constantly reinforced through media, education, religion, economics, and status. Families do the same thing on a smaller scale. Certain values are rewarded, others are punished. Maybe you were praised for being high-achieving but criticized for being emotional. Maybe you were rewarded for self-sacrifice but shamed for having needs. Maybe independence was admired and obedience was mandatory. Over time, you learn which values earn safety and you adapt. Then there are social systems. Corporations incentivize productivity. Markets incentivize consumption. Institutions incentivize conformity. Algorithms incentivize attention. None of that is random. Social systems reward certain values because those values keep the system functioning. But here's the key distinction. Cultural approval explains pressure. It does not define your values. Just because something is praised does not mean you value it. Just because something is punished does not mean you don't. You can spend years chasing what culture rewards and still feel empty. You can resist what culture pressures and feel more aligned than ever. You can resist what culture pressures and feel more aligned than ever. A lot of internal conflict begins right there. People think they're failing because they don't prioritize what the culture celebrates. But often what's happening is simpler. Their actual values don't match the hierarchy they were taught to climb. And when the mismatch isn't named, it turns into self-doubt, shame, overwork, resentment, and burnout. Not because the person is broken, but because the pressure is external and the priority is internal. Culture may influence your values. Family can shape them. Systems can pressure them. But none of the forces get the final vote. Your behavior does. And when you start separating pressure from priority, something shifts. You stop asking what should matter, and you start asking what already does. There's one more layer worth naming directly. Some of the values promoted by corporations, governments, and large-scale systems are not designed to make your life better. They are designed to extract from you your time, your attention, your money, and your emotional energy. And the way they do that is by promoting value hierarchies that keep you activated: fear of exile, fear of being wrong, fear of missing out, and anger at perceived injustice, constant comparison, and endless upgrading. These are not random cultural trends. These are psychologically effective levers. If you're afraid of being excluded, you will conform. If you're angry, you will engage. If you're insecure, you will consume. If you're striving, you will work harder than your body can sustain. This isn't paranoia, it's behavioral economics. When profit and control are involved, values are shaped intentionally, not because someone twirls a mustache in a dark room, but because systems optimize for outcomes, and activated humans are profitable humans. So if you adopt the values that are constantly pushed at you without examining them, you may end up living in fear of exile, addicted to outrage, or chasing status that never satisfies. Not because you're weak, but because those value structures were engineered to bypass reflection. This is why values work requires discernment. Because if you never separate what is incentivized from what you actually prioritize, You can spend your life optimizing yourself for someone else's gain, and that's not alignment, that's unconscious participation.
Values and universal law.
Which brings us to something worth understanding about how values actually function, not as moral statements, but as structural ones. Values are not moral currency. The universe doesn't reward you for valuing what is considered good, and it doesn't punish you for valuing what is considered bad. Universal systems don't evaluate character, they respond to pattern, to consistency, reinforcement, and alignment between intention and behavior. If you repeatedly invest time, energy, and attention into something, that pattern strengthens. If you consistently act in alignment with a priority, consequences follow that direction. This isn't about virtue, it's about structure. Universal law doesn't respond to admiration, it responds to repetition. It doesn't respond to declared values, it responds to embodied ones. And this matters because people often assume that simply valuing something, growth, kindness, discipline, or success, should automatically change outcomes. But values alone don't create results. Consistent alignment does. So instead of asking, am I valuing the right things? The better question is, what am I consistently reinforcing? Values are neutral inputs. They aren't graded, they are directional. And universal systems respond to direction, not moral approval.
Do values change?
And because values are structural, not moral, they're allowed to update. That's not a flaw, that's the point. Yes, values change. Not randomly, not because you're inconsistent, and not because you lack character. They change because life changes. Capacity changes. The amount of energy you have at 20 is not the same as at 40. The nervous system you have after trauma is not the same as before it. The bandwidth you have raising children is not the same as when you're alone. Roles change. You might value ambition in one season and stability in another. Privacy might be important in one chapter, while visibility becomes crucial in the next. Seasons change. What matters during survival will not be identical to what matters during safety. What you prioritized when you were proving yourself may not survive once you no longer need to prove anything. And nervous systems change. Healing shifts tolerance. Burnouts shift priorities. Grief rearranges importance. Illness clarifies what was never optional to begin with. People often get confused at this point. They think evolving values mean they were wrong before, or that they're abandoning who they used to be. But values evolving is not betrayal, it's information. It tells you your context has shifted, your capacity has shifted, and your ranking has shifted. The danger isn't that values change. The danger is clinging to outdated values because your identity is attached to them. That's how people stay in careers they've outgrown. That's how they stay in roles that drain them. That's how they continue chasing goals that made sense 10 years ago, but now feel hollow. There is nothing morally superior about consistency if the context has changed. Values are not vows, they are rankings, and rankings update when reality updates. That's not instability, that's responsiveness. And responsiveness is not weakness, it's coherence.
A lived example, unsubscribing from values that were never mine.
Before I close, I want to share something personal, because everything we've talked about in this episode is pointing here. For most of my life, I lived under other people's values, my family's values, my culture's values, society's values. My life was so packed with trying to meet what others expected of me that I was constantly unhappy, stressed, and burned out. And the ones who paid the biggest price weren't just me, it was my children. It wasn't until after I turned 50 that I simply ran out of capacity to continue. The body gives out before the mind catches up sometimes. And in that space, something became clear. I didn't want to do it anymore, not because I gave up, but because I had finally started to pay attention. What I noticed was something important and a little unsettling. Most of the people whose values I had been living under weren't living by those values themselves. They expected compliance from everyone else while quietly exempting themselves. I'm not saying that as a moral judgment. It was just something I couldn't unsee. And here's what surprised me about the process. It didn't start with figuring out what I valued. It started with stopping, one by one, living by values that had never been mine. Something unexpected happened when I did. My social circle got smaller. The demands on my time decreased. I started saying no, not because things didn't align with my values, but because they were values I no longer wanted to live under. And as my life got quieter, something I hadn't had in years appeared: space. And in that space, I could finally hear myself. That's when my actual values started to surface. One of the first things I named was my children. That came late, and I can't get those years back, but I can show up fully now, and I do. What I dropped made room for that. I dropped the pressure to maintain a certain body. I stopped pretending to be perfect. I stopped molding myself to fit into groups that were never really mine. I walked away from volunteer roles I'd taken out of obligation, and from a career I didn't even like, and that had taken years from my life and from theirs. None of that was easy, but none of it was as hard as continuing. I also want to name something most people don't talk about. Values can be weaponized. People use the language of values to take the upper hand in a relationship, to apply pressure, to make you feel like you're failing a test you never agreed to take. Learning to see that clearly was part of the process for me. And one of the most important things I learned: watch what people do, not what they say. Because more often than not, behavior and words don't match. Values live in the pattern, not in the declaration. For me, this was a 3-year process. It started with emptying, clearing out all the voices and opinions and expectations that were never mine to begin with. So I had the space and silence to actually reflect, to realign, and to choose. If you haven't started that yet, that's okay. There's no right age, no right moment. But if something in this episode stirred something in you, that's worth paying attention to. Now is always a good time to begin.
Final thought and ethics.
At the center of everything in this episode is something deceptively simple. Values are not what you say matters. They're what you protect when something has to give. But here's the thing. Values are internal. They guide your trade-offs and outline your priorities. But they don't automatically address what happens when your priorities impact others. You might value freedom, but what if your freedom disrupts someone else's stability? You might value ambition, but what if your ambition increases someone else's workload? You might value honesty, but what if your honesty causes harm? That's where values alone fall short. Once you know what you value, the next big question is, how do you act responsibly when your choices affect others? That's where ethics come into play. Ethics aren't about judging right and wrong. They're about assessing responsibility when you have power. They ask who is affected, who holds influence, what is my role here? Values tell you what matters to you. Ethics guide you on how to act when others are involved. Without ethics, values can justify almost anything. With ethics, values become accountable. That's where the next episode picks up. From internal alignment to relational impact. From what I choose to how I handle the consequences of that choice. That's the next layer of the internal ecosystem. I'm going to pause here and let this land. If something in this resonated, you don't need to do anything with it. Just sit with it and notice what continues to unfold. Thank you for listening and for being here with me.